Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into the grim, dangerous, and deeply unglamorous world of medieval assassins, the shadowy figures of legend, the whispered names in candlelit halls, the men who supposedly drifted through castles like smoke and altered history with a single silent strike. At least, that's how the movies tell it. Because while Hollywood gives us hooded anti-heroes leaping across rooftops like they just stepped out of Assassin's Creed, the reality was far less elegant and far more miserable. Being a medieval assassin didn't feel cool. It felt cold, hungry, paranoid, and it usually ended badly. But before we slip into the shadows, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel in the quiet hours. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's clear something up right away. No one in the Middle Ages woke up, stretched, and thought, you know what? I'd love to stab a nobleman in the throat for 12 silver coins and the privilege of hiding in a barrel for 3 days. Becoming an assassin wasn't a career path. It was more like the final stop on the everything in my life has gone horribly wrong train. Most medieval assassins weren't mysterious loners trained in mountaintop temples. They weren't elite specialists raised from childhood in the art of silent death. They were desperate peasants, disgraced soldiers, ex-thieves with steady hands, men drowning in debt. People so far off society's radar that they could kill someone and barely disrupt the census. If you were wealthy, powerful, and well-connected, you didn't become an assassin, you hired one. And that's where things get uncomfortable, because the medieval world wasn't short on grudges. Noble feuds simmered for generations. Political rivalries turned lethal. Religious tensions burned hot. And when honor, inheritance, or influence was at stake, sometimes a quiet blade in a dark corridor seemed like the simplest solution. But simple didn't mean safe. Medieval towns were small. Faces were familiar. Strangers stood out. If you killed someone important, you didn't just walk away into the mist. You were hunted, questioned, tortured, displayed. There was no retirement plan, no pension, no dramatic rooftop escape at sunset. Just the constant awareness that if your employer decided you were inconvenient, you might not live long enough to spend your 12 silver coins. So tonight, we're going to peel back the myth. We're going to look past the romantic image of the hooded figure in the torchlight. And we're going to step into the uncomfortable, unsanitary, anxiety-soaked reality of what it actually meant to be a medieval assassin. Get comfortable. Because this isn't a story about glory, it's a story about desperation. And it begins in the dark. You weren't in management. If you had land, titles, or clean fingernails, you weren't the one holding the knife. But if you just slipped out of someone's dungeon, had a reputation for solving problems, and could walk into a tavern without anyone remembering your face, congratulations. Somewhere, someone was about to slide a coin purse across a sticky wooden table and whisper a name. And it was never a pleasant name. You weren't hired to eliminate Bob, the quiet turnip farmer. No, it was a corrupt baron, a bishop with suspiciously heavy pockets, a rival merchant prince, someone with 12 bodyguards, a stone keep, and a moat that absolutely did not exist for decoration. The pay, tempting. The job, horrifying. But by the time a person even considered accepting that coin purse, they usually had nothing left to lose. No family, no prospects, no future, and certainly no dental plan. There were also, let's call them, benefits. No pension, no glory, no evenings off. You couldn't hang a wooden sign outside your hut that read, "Quiet Eliminations, by appointment only." There was no branding, no networking events, no guild mixer where you swapped techniques over roasted lamb. You stayed quiet. You moved quickly. And you never, ever told anyone what you did for a living, especially not 3 ales deep at the inn. Oh me, I'm a traveling carpet seller. The stains? Die, of course. So no, nobody grew up dreaming of becoming a medieval assassin. They landed there because the world chewed them up, spat them out, and handed them a hood and a rusty dagger as a consolation prize. You weren't the hero. You weren't even the villain. You were the uncomfortable solution, the whispered contingency plan, the footnote in someone else's power grab. And more often than not, you didn't even live long enough to enjoy the coin. Now let's burst the first myth wide open. Medieval assassins did not train by candlelight in some hidden monastery.
Get comfortable, because this isn't a story about glory. It's a story about desperation, and it begins in the dark. You weren't in management. If you had land, titles, or clean fingernails, you weren't the one holding the knife. But if you just slipped out of someone's dungeon, had a reputation for solving problems, and could walk into a tavern without anyone remembering your face, congratulations. Somewhere, someone was about to slide a coin purse across a sticky wooden table and whisper a name, and it was never a pleasant name. You weren't hired to eliminate Bob, the quiet turnip farmer. No, it was a corrupt baron, a bishop with suspiciously heavy pockets, a rival merchant prince, someone with 12 bodyguards, a stone keep, and a moat that absolutely did not exist for decoration. The pay? Tempting. The job? Horrifying. But by the time a person even considered accepting that coin purse, they usually had nothing left to lose. No family, no prospects, no future, and certainly no dental plan. There were also, let's call them benefits. No pension, no glory, no evenings off. You couldn't hang a wooden sign outside your hut that read "Quiet Eliminations by Appointment Only." There was no branding, no networking events, no guild mixer where you swap techniques over roasted lamb. You stayed quiet, you moved quickly, and you never ever told anyone what you did for a living, especially not 3 ales deep at the inn. Oh, me? I'm a traveling carpet seller. The stains? Die. Of course. So no, nobody grew up dreaming of becoming a medieval assassin. They landed there because the world chewed them up, spat them out, and handed them a hood and a rusty dagger as a consolation prize. You weren't the hero. You weren't even the villain. You were the uncomfortable solution, the whispered contingency plan, the footnote in someone else's power grab. And more often than not, you didn't even live long enough to enjoy the coin. Now let's burst the first myth wide open. Medieval assassins did not train by candlelight in some hidden monastery, guided by wise mentors while inspirational flute music played softly in the background. There was no ancient handbook titled "The Subtle Art of Throat Cutting." No graduation ceremony, no ceremonial hood. Most learned the way people learned everything in the Middle Ages, badly, quickly, and through trial and very fatal error.
It came from survival. You learned how to kill by doing it fast, messy, and without witnesses. Then you vanished before anyone could sketch your face and tack it to a church door. There were no graduation ceremonies, just bruises, bloodstains, and the slow realization that you were completely alone. So why become an assassin? Coin. Cold, heavy, jangling, beautifully spendable coin. That's what draws you in. The promise of it. The idea that one clean job could fix everything. But coin is a story clients tell, and like most stories told in whispers, it leaves something out. When someone hires an assassin, they don't want a long-term arrangement. They want a one-time service. No paperwork, no witnesses, including you. They offer a pouch of silver, half now, half when the job is done. When the job is done means after they're sure you didn't fail, didn't leave a trail, didn't make them look foolish, didn't survive long enough to remember who hired you, because an assassin who lives too long becomes a liability, and liabilities are expensive. It came from survival. You learned how to kill by doing it fast, messy, and without witnesses. Then you vanished before anyone could sketch your face and tack it to a church door. There were no graduation ceremonies, just bruises, bloodstains, and the slow realization that you were completely alone. So why become an assassin? Coin. Cold, heavy, jangling, beautifully spendable coin. That's what draws you in. The promise of it. The idea that one clean job could fix everything. But coin is a story clients tell, and like most stories told in whispers, it leaves something out. When someone hires an assassin, they don't want a long-term arrangement. They want a one-time service. No paperwork, no witnesses, including you. They offer a pouch of silver, half now, half when the job is done. When the job is done means after they're sure you didn't fail, didn't leave a trail, didn't make them look foolish, didn't survive long enough to remember who hired you, because an assassin who lives too long becomes a liability, and liabilities are expensive.
So you take the job. You slip through shadows, risk your life, maybe put a blade into a baron while he dreams of taxes and treason. It's not pretty. It's not poetic. It's sweaty, cramped, and smells faintly of horse. And when you return for your payment, about that. The client fled. Terribly sorry. Or worse, they're still there, smiling. And suddenly you're the loose end. A knife to your gut is cheaper than a bonus. Even when you do get paid, it's never enough. Not for the risk. Not for the blood. Not for the 3 days you spent hiding in a haystack negotiating with fleas and your conscience. You get a handful of coins, a curt nod, and a reminder you were never here. Some contracts weren't even real. Political traps. You'd be told to eliminate someone dangerous, only to discover the target was bait and the guards were waiting. Congratulations. You just walked into a sting operation with your name already carved into the gallows. And you couldn't exactly go to court about it. Your Honor, I'd like to sue Lord Edmund for breach of assassin contract. The only court you'd see was the one where you were the example. So you learned. Payment up front. No credit. Trust no one, especially not the greasy little scribe who swears this job will change your life. It does, mostly by shortening it. Being an assassin meant surviving on broken promises and vanishing before they broke you. The gear, or lack thereof, forget fantasy novels. No retractable wrist blades, no smoke bombs, No enchanted daggers that whisper encouragement. Your toolkit was whatever you could steal, sharpen, or hide beneath a tattered cloak without clanking. If you were lucky, and by lucky I mean you once found a gold coin in a dead man's shoe, you had a decent dagger, not ornate, not dragon-shaped, just sharp, hopefully rust-free, ideally not still scented with the previous owner. Poison existed, but it wasn't elegant wine goblet drama. Most medieval poisons were unpredictable mixtures of plants, minerals, and things that probably shouldn't have been in the same jar. Some worked instantly. Some took hours. Some just made your target vomit for 2 days and recover, angrier and very suspicious of stew. Rope was useful. You could strangle, climb, or bind someone. But you'd better know your knots. Nothing ruins a silent takedown like whispering, "Wait, does this go under or over?" Bows were effective if you had one, knew how to use it, and weren't trying to smuggle it into a palace disguised as a flower arranger. Most killings were up close. No dramatic long shots, just quick, quiet, and preferably not so bloody that you slip on the evidence. There were no backups. If your blade bent, broke, or dropped into a well, time to improvise. Roof tile, rusty nail, shoe buckle with ambition. You carried tools hidden in hems, boots, sometimes even hollowed out bread. Not because it was clever, because you had to. Your weapon wasn't just a tool. It was your partner, your supervisor, and your retirement plan. And you prayed it didn't betray you mid-strike, because in the end, it wasn't the weapon that did the killing. It was you, poorly equipped, underslept, expected to perform miracles with a spoon and a prayer. The targets. No one hired you to stab Jeff the Candlemaker. Your targets were nobles, bishops, military officers, sometimes royalty, people who were very, very hard to kill. First, guards, dozens of them, armed, armored, suspicious by profession, some at the gates, some at the doors, some just standing there daring you to blink incorrectly. You'd spend days memorizing patrol routes, counting stair steps, learning which guard had asthma and which one flirted with the kitchen maid. Second, walls. Castles didn't have welcome mats. They had gatehouses, murder holes, and moats full of things that bite. If you avoided drowning, you still had to worry about arrows and boiling oil. Yes, boiling oil. Your job description included maybe flambéed while trespassing. Third, staff, cooks, scribes, stable boys. One wrong glance and they'd whisper to the captain of the guard faster than you could say, "I'm just the herbalist." You weren't just fighting swords, you were fighting gossip. And medieval gossip traveled at light speed when someone's head was involved. Then there was the target, paranoid, and rightly so, surrounded by rivals, relatives with claims, and smiling traitors. They didn't eat without a taster, didn't sleep without locks. Some rotated bedrooms, some used decoy beds, deadly musical chairs. And don't get excited about feasts. Yes, they're drunk. So is everyone else. You still have to pass guards, dogs, a suspicious jester, and 50 witnesses holding tankards. Getting close could take weeks, posing as a servant, bribing a chambermaid, hiding in barrels that once held fish and now hold regret. When the moment came, you had one chance, one perfect, non-squeaky ghost in the night strike. Miss it? You become the next public warning, swinging from the gate with a sign that reads, "Nice try, the disguise." When people imagine medieval assassins, they picture sleek black robes and dramatic hoods. Reality? You looked like a sick goat herder with unresolved issues. Disguises weren't high fashion. No tailored cloaks, no concealed armor. Just whatever you could scavenge. Peasant rags, an oversized monk's robe, or a guard uniform that absolutely still smelled like its previous owner. Blending in meant looking like everyone else, unwashed, limping, slightly malnourished. You didn't look suspicious because of your cloak. You looked suspicious because you kept adjusting your belt to hide a dagger wrapped in cheesecloth. And forget masks. No elegant face coverings. Most attempts just made you look contagious, great for avoiding conversation, terrible for entering banquets. If someone asked who you were, you had to improvise. I'm Brother Tobias. I specialize in silent prayer and rooftop maintenance. Even if you passed the guards, noble households weren't stupid. Servants noticed unfamiliar faces, especially ones who couldn't name the cook's cat or properly handle a chamber pot. In this line of work, survival wasn't about being invisible. It was about being forgettable and vanishing before anyone remembered you at all. You were always one. I've never seen you before. That's the problem. You're either invisible or about to be clubbed with a candlestick. If your disguise works, congratulations. You now have to stay in character for hours, maybe days, pretending not to notice the alarming number of extremely stab-worthy people wandering past you. And wigs? No. If you needed to look older, you hunched. Younger, you shaved badly. Different, you smeared dirt on your face and hoped no one stood close enough to notice your beard was glued on with honey. Your disguise didn't protect you. It bought you 5 minutes of confusion. After that, you either vanished or performed. And if anyone saw through it, no one wants to be the assassin caught in the bishop's laundry room wearing a nun's habit and holding a sword, especially not on a feast day. Alone, always alone. You didn't have a team, no sidekick with a crossbow, no alchemist in a candlelit basement, no handler sliding coded scrolls under your door. You had you, a rusty dagger, and trust issues so severe they deserved their own monastery. There were no reliable guilds. If rumors of assassin brotherhoods existed, they were tavern fantasies fueled by mead and boredom. You were more likely to meet a ghost than another professional killer interested in networking. Isolation wasn't dramatic, it was practical. The fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you lived. Every contact was a risk. Every loose tongue, a potential noose. Even your client might not know your real name. If they did, you were already planning how to disappear. Companionship? Laughable. Friends ask questions. Lovers notice bruises, bloodstains, and why you sleep with a blade under the pillow. You couldn't settle down. One person recognizes you at the market, and suddenly your life becomes a sprint toward the nearest sewer grate. Even other criminals avoided you. Thieves and smugglers were social creatures. You made people disappear. That's not the kind of man others share stew with. And don't expect sympathy. You couldn't confess how hard it was to sleep after silently strangling a corrupt bishop. If you talked about your work, people assumed you were dangerous. They were correct. So you kept your secrets, your scars, your weapons. At ends, you took the darkest corner, back to the wall, eyes on the door, never too drunk, never more than one night, never your real name. Being a medieval assassin meant mastering one skill above all, vanishing, not just from crowds, from every life you never got to have. Failure. Let's say you planned perfectly. You bribed the doorman, you posed as a chimney sweep, you slipped inside unseen, and then you froze. Maybe the target turned unexpectedly. Maybe they were holding their child. Maybe your hand shook like a terrified squirrel at exactly the wrong moment. Congratulations, you're dead. Failure wasn't a bad review. It was public theater. Ropes, fire, wheels, iron devices with names like the Bone Cracker's Delight. Miss the kill and the target survives loudly. Suddenly, there's a description of you circulating. A crude sketch nailed to tavern walls within 30 miles. And those guards you once slipped past? Now they're motivated. Sometimes the greater threat wasn't the target. It was your client. If you failed, you weren't an asset anymore. You were a liability, someone who could be captured, interrogated, persuaded to talk. The people who hired you would be the first to hire someone else to silence you. There were no second chances. No, sorry, blade slipped, I'll try again tomorrow. You had one moment, miss it, and the best outcome was dying before anyone extracted names from you. And the shame, quiet, suffocating shame, lingered. You didn't just fail to kill, you failed to be invisible. In this profession, perfection wasn't pride, it was survival. No one cared that you succeeded 12 times before. You were only as good as your last kill. And if your last kill didn't happen, run. Success, which is worse. Let's say it worked. The dagger struck true. No scream, no alarm, just a clean collapse and one very important person who now wasn't. Congratulations. Now run for your life. Success didn't mean wine on a rooftop. It meant sprinting through alleys with blood on your boots and dogs already catching your scent. The second the blade struck, your new job became escape. Doors slam, guards shout, gates close. The city tightens like a fist. You had to plan the exit before the kill. Routes, disguised as fallback houses, a boatman who owed you a favor, a stable boy who didn't ask questions, because within minutes, the city locked down. Angry men with swords received your rough sketch and the words, possibly armed, extremely stabby. And the client? If they intended to pay you, they weren't waiting with a smile and a thank you note. They'd vanish too, because an assassin who just proved he can infiltrate anything is the most dangerous man alive. You knew too much. So even when you succeeded, you walked away with coins in one hand and a target on your back. Your reward? Sleeping in haylofts, bribing ferry captains, shaving your beard in the dark, pretending to be Brother Lucian joining monks heading east. Success didn't mean safety. It meant starting over, new city, new name, more people looking for you. You made the kill. Now run like hell. Superstition, the bonus problem. As if poverty and constant pursuit weren't enough, you also had to survive imagination. In the Middle Ages, assassins weren't just feared, they were cursed. To peasants, you weren't a professional. You were an omen, a shadow creature whispering to demons and smearing frog guts on blades beneath full moons. How else could you slip past guards? Logic wasn't popular. Superstition was. Some believed assassins could shapeshift. Others claimed you were invisible unless doused in holy water. A favorite tale insisted you made pacts with forest spirits and breathed death through walls. Imagine walking through a village and hearing, "Don't make eye contact. He might hex the baby." Your dagger forged in a cursed forge. Poison, not chemistry, witchcraft. You stirred it with a severed toe under a blood moon. You'd think fear would help you. It didn't. Superstitious mobs don't hesitate. They don't investigate. They throw stones, light fires, shout, burn him before he calls lightning. If someone choked on a chicken bone in your vicinity, whispers began. Shadow man. You had to keep moving. Stay too long and a priest is ringing a bell while 5 farmers grip pitchforks like destiny just handed them purpose. Carry dried herbs? Suspicious. Strange coins? Sorcerer. Foreign accent? Definitely cursed. In a world that believed monsters wore human faces, being quiet, clever, or quick made you dangerous. And medieval logic solved danger with fire. Poison, the elegant disaster. Ah, poison, the elegant assassin's tool. No screams, no steel, just a sip, a stagger, and silence. That's the fantasy. Reality? Poisoning someone in the Middle Ages was like trying to win a bar fight with herbal tea and optimism. There was no purified cyanide, no tidy capsule labeled fast-acting doom. You had plants, mushrooms, minerals, occasionally something that once hopped. You gathered, ground, prayed. Measurement? You eyeballed it. Too little and your noble vomits dramatically and doubles his guard. Too much and you poison the entire table, including yourself. And even if it worked, poisoning carried its own risks. Food tasters existed. Suspicion lingered. If someone fell ill after dinner, the kitchen staff were interrogated. Servants were whipped, guards locked down the estate, and if anyone even suspected foul play, poisoners weren't hanged. They were made examples of. Because steel was honorable. Poison was treacherous, and treachery demanded spectacle. A pinch too little, and nothing happens. A pinch too much, and you die before the first course is served. Poison sounds elegant in theory. In practice, it was chaos. Medieval kitchens were not quiet laboratories. They were loud, smoky war zones full of shouting cooks, boiling pots, and servants running in every direction. You couldn't simply stroll in and sprinkle nightshade into the soup. You had to bribe a cook, or impersonate one, or sneak in when no one was watching. Worst of all, you might have to poison a meal that would pass through 3 tasters, and sometimes a dog. Yes, a dog. If your target was a noble, eating wasn't casual. It was treated like a military operation. Food was tasted, blessed, inspected, and sniffed by everyone from the steward to the court jester. By the time the meal reached the Lord's plate, it had gone through more security than a royal wedding. But let's imagine you succeeded. You slipped the poison in. No one noticed. The target actually ate it. Now comes the unpredictable part. Some poisons acted quickly. Others took hours. Some took days. One minute your target is laughing at a joke. The next he's clutching his stomach and demanding his astrologer. And if he survived, guess who everyone blamed? Not the cook, not the taster. You, the quiet man who knew too much about herbs and always looked slightly nervous. Poison wasn't efficient. It was slow, risky, and full of variables. None of them in your favor. And if you were caught, you didn't get a quick death. You were interrogated with tools until you confessed to poisoning everyone from the Duke to the dog, the forgotten killer. You might think that if you removed a tyrant, sabotaged a royal bloodline, or changed the course of history with a single dagger, someone would remember your name. They wouldn't. You were an assassin. Your name was never meant to exist. At best, you became a rumor, a hooded stranger, a foreigner with cold eyes, the quiet man who never finished his ale. You could pull off the most legendary kill of the century and still end up as nothing more than a mysterious death in the official record. That was the point. Your client didn't want a story. They wanted plausible deniability. The fewer people who knew who did it, the safer they were, and the less likely they were to end up poisoned themselves. So your name vanished the moment the job was finished. If you even used a real one, you didn't sign your work, you didn't brag, you didn't keep trophies. You existed only in the moment of the kill. And if someone did know your name, that was a loose end, and loose ends rarely lived long. There were no medals for silence, no monuments for the man who stopped a war with one blade in the night. If a noble wanted a statue, they built one of themselves. You got an unmarked grave. Or worse, a head on a spike labeled traitor. Sometimes your name survived only as a curse. Remember what happened to Lord Ulrich? Yes, and the man who did it? Gone like smoke. That was your legacy. Not fame, not glory, absence. Heroes were remembered. Assassins were erased. The client problem. Let's say you survived. You completed the job. You even got paid. A miracle. Now all you have to do is lie low and trust your client to honor the deal. Right? Wrong. In the world of medieval assassination, there was one rule more sacred than don't get caught. Never trust the person paying you. Your client didn't hire you out of respect. They hired you because they needed something terrible done, and you were the sharpest tool in the dark. Once the job was finished, you became a problem. You knew too much. You knew who wanted whom dead, why they wanted it, and how much they were willing to pay for it. That made you dangerous. So, what did many clients do? They disappeared, or denied ever meeting you, or worse, they hired another assassin to eliminate the first one. Yes, double booking happened. One killer for the target, another for the cleanup. No refunds, just reduced risk. And if you tried to blackmail your client, bold move. Also your final mistake. Powerful people didn't negotiate with assassins. They destroyed them. If your employer had even a shred of honor, an extremely rare species, you might get your payment and be left alone. But even then, you assumed someone was watching you, memorizing your walk, waiting for the moment when eliminating you became convenient. Because in their eyes, if you killed once, you could kill again. And no one wanted to be next. There is no retirement. Let's imagine something almost impossible. You survive the jobs, the betrayals, the poison plots. You outlive your enemies. Now what? Retirement? Not a chance. Medieval assassins didn't get pensions, no farewell banquets, no cottages by the sea. You didn't retire. You vanished. Because you were never safe. You carried too many secrets in your head. Too many names, too many ghosts. People didn't want you retired. They wanted you forgotten, which often meant buried. And even if no one came after you, a very big if, you lived with the constant fear that someone might. A young assassin looking to prove himself. A contract for a mysterious old man who used to be dangerous. So you changed your name again. You moved to a village where no one asked questions. You faked a limp, sold herbs, claimed you once worked as a guard, but you never slept well. You avoided crowds. You sat facing the door. Your dagger stayed under the floorboards beside a pouch of coins you rarely touched, because the money still smelled like the man you killed for it, and you didn't trust yourself either. Years of silent killing do something to the mind. Every knock made you flinch. Every stranger might recognize you. You stopped dreaming. Dreaming was dangerous. You couldn't love. You couldn't relax. You lived like a ghost pretending to be a man. There was no assassin, only a slow fade into obscurity, always watching, always waiting, until one day you slipped into the dark and no one noticed. The truth. By now you've probably figured it out. Being a medieval assassin wasn't romantic. It wasn't noble. It wasn't even particularly profitable. It was a brutal, thankless profession that ended quickly and badly for most people who tried it. You wouldn't last a week, maybe not even a day, because you'd start with the wrong assumptions, that you'd be sleek, confident, a whisper in the dark. In reality, you'd be cold, hungry, and one mistake away from the noose. You'd slip into town ready for action only to discover the target moved. The guards are drunk but nervous, and the stable boy you paid for information just sold you out for bread and ale. You'd stab the wrong man. Get spotted by a maid who once saw your face near the chapel. Suddenly, you're not a shadow. You're the problem. You run. But medieval streets are mud, loose cobblestones, and a frankly alarming number of chickens. You slip. A guard named Thomas tackles you. Thomas just got dumped and is very motivated. Even if you survive that, what's next? No allies, no honor, no future, just whispers and suspicion. Even if you succeed, the best outcome is dying old and alone under a fake name in a village that still believes in fairies. So no, you wouldn't last. And honestly, you shouldn't try. Because the assassin's life wasn't cool. It was a machine that chewed people up and spat out shadows. It offered power without peace, purpose without belonging. You didn't make history. You erased yourself from it. And the only thing waiting at the end was silence. Olympias, the woman of serpents. Before she became the feared queen of Macedon, Olympias was known as Myrtle, a Molossian princess from the rugged lands of Epirus. Her people claimed descent from the legendary hero Achilles himself. Whether that blood truly flowed through her veins is impossible to know. But one thing was certain. This was not a woman destined for the sidelines of history. From a young age, Myrtle grew up surrounded by ritual, prophecy, and ancient traditions older than the kingdoms around her. Her education was not limited to politics and court etiquette. It included mystery cults, ecstatic rites, and devotion to the god Dionysus. While other princesses practiced embroidery and diplomacy, Myrtle was drawn to the strange and the sacred, to serpents, to omens, to ceremonies held under moonlight where followers of Dionysus danced barefoot in ecstatic trance. Her connection to the divine was not symbolic. It was personal. Ancient writers, many of them fascinated and frightened by powerful women, claimed she kept sacred snakes in her chambers. Some even wrote that the serpent slept beside her in bed. Was it true? Or was it propaganda designed to make her seem monstrous? We may never know, but the story endured. To her supporters, the snakes proved she was favored by the gods. To her enemies, they proved she was something darker. Either way, the image became inseparable from her legend. Because Olympias did not rise to power through armies alone, her strength came from something harder to measure: mystery, fear, faith. Her true power began not on a battlefield or a throne, but in the flickering torchlight of sacred rituals, among whispering priestesses and the silent coils of serpents. She wasn't just a princess. She was an omen, a woman touched by forces older than kings and colder than steel. For me, when Philip II of Macedon, brutal, brilliant, and famously passionate, arrived on the sacred island of Samothrace for a religious initiation, he expected ritual and ceremony. He did not expect destiny. There he encountered Olympias, a mysterious young princess whose presence carried the aura of prophecy. Their meeting was not merely romantic. It was electric, charged with myth and ambition. Their marriage would not be remembered as a simple political alliance. It would become a collision of prophecy and power. Legends quickly surrounded the union. Some claimed lightning split the sky on their wedding night. Others whispered that Olympias dreamed a thunderbolt struck her womb. Whether these stories were believed or carefully crafted, one thing is certain. This marriage would produce Alexander the Great, and Olympias intended to shape his destiny from the moment he drew his first breath. The marriage between Olympias and Philip was never a fairy tale. Philip was charismatic, ruthless, and constantly expanding his kingdom. By the time he married Olympias around 357 BCE, he already treated marriages as tools of diplomacy, collecting wives to secure alliances across Greece and beyond. Olympias, however, was not a woman meant to stand quietly in the background. Born into the royal house of Epirus and deeply connected to mystical religious traditions, she believed in prophecy and divine purpose. She held her own court, consulted oracles, and surrounded herself with sacred rituals. Macedon itself was not a peaceful kingdom. It was a brutal arena of ambition where kings were murdered by relatives and power shifted through betrayal. Into this world, Olympias walked with absolute confidence. She had not come simply to be a queen. She had come to secure a dynasty. When Alexander was born, the myths surrounding him began immediately. Stories spread that Olympias dreamed lightning struck her womb. Another tale claimed flames danced harmlessly around the infant. Philip himself reportedly dreamed he sealed his wife's womb with a lion. These visions may have been propaganda or genuine belief. Either way, they helped craft a powerful narrative. Alexander was no ordinary child. He was destined to rule, rival queens in palace warfare. Despite the birth of an heir, Philip and Olympias drifted apart. Philip continued marrying other women for political advantage. One of these marriages would ignite the greatest crisis of Olympias' life. Philip married Cleopatra Eurydice, a Macedonian noblewoman whose family was deeply connected to the kingdom's elite. This marriage was not just insulting, it was dangerous. If Cleopatra produced a son, that child would be considered a pure Macedonian heir, something many nobles might prefer over Alexander, whose mother came from Epirus. To Olympias, this was a declaration of war. The palace of Pella became a battlefield of whispers, alliances, and rivalries, the feast that broke the court. At Philip's wedding feast with Cleopatra, tensions exploded. Cleopatra's uncle, the powerful general Attalus, drunkenly mocked Alexander and Olympias. He questioned Alexander's legitimacy, suggesting that the next heir should be a true Macedonian. Alexander reportedly erupted in fury. Olympias soon left Macedon and returned to Epirus. But exile did not mean defeat. It meant strategy. In 336 BC, the impossible happened. During a grand celebration, Philip II of Macedon was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. The entire kingdom froze in shock. Who was responsible? Was it a personal grievance? A political conspiracy? A revenge killing? Or something darker? Some whispered that Olympias herself may have been involved. No one could prove it. But what happened next deepened the suspicion. Within days of Philip's death, Cleopatra Eurydice and her infant child were dead. Ancient sources claim Olympias orchestrated the killings. Some say Cleopatra was forced to hang herself after watching her child murdered. Whether the details are exaggerated or not, the message was clear. No rival bloodline would survive. With the threats eliminated, Alexander the Great, only 20 years old, became king. Behind the scenes, Olympias ensured that the nobles, generals, and courtiers accepted him. She had not merely protected his rise, she had engineered it. As Alexander prepared his campaign against Persia, Olympias remained in Macedon. Officially, she was only the queen mother. In reality, she remained one of the most powerful figures in the kingdom. She wrote letters constantly to her son, letters filled with advice, warnings, and accusations against his political rivals. Among those rivals was Antipater, the general responsible for ruling Greece, while Alexander marched east. The relationship between Olympias and Antipater became increasingly hostile. But Alexander, busy conquering half the known world, tried to balance the conflict. In 323 BCE, Alexander the Great died suddenly in Babylon. The empire he created collapsed instantly into chaos. There was no clear successor, only generals with armies. And Olympias, now an aging queen mother, refused to disappear quietly. Olympias returned to Macedon, determined to defend her grandson, Alexander IV of Macedon. She allied with rival generals and marched back into power. For a brief moment, she ruled again. Her enemies were executed, rival claimants were eliminated. But Cassander gathered his forces and struck back. Olympias was trapped in the fortress of Pydna. After a long siege, starvation forced surrender. Cassander did not execute her himself. Instead, he allowed the families of those she had executed to judge her. They condemned her to death. But when the moment came, the executioners hesitated. They stood before the woman who had been the mother of Alexander the Great. The woman whispered to command snakes and kings alike. So Cassander sent outsiders, men who felt no fear of her legend. And thus Olympias was finally killed, not in glory, not in ceremony, but in silence. Olympias died abandoned and unarmed, but history remembers her. She was not merely the mother of Alexander the Great, she was one of the architects of his empire. She used prophecy as a weapon, fear as a shield, and belief as her greatest tool. Some called her a murderer, others called her a visionary. But no historian could call her insignificant, because long before Alexander conquered the world, his mother had already conquered the palace. Long before marble temples rose in Athens or Sparta forged its warriors, another civilization ruled the Aegean. It was older, richer, and far more mysterious. On the island of Crete stood the palace of Knossos, the beating heart of the Minoan civilization. To modernize, the ruins are fascinating. To ancient visitors, they must have felt otherworldly. Stone corridors twist in unexpected directions. Staircases lead upward and downward through multiple levels. Rooms open into courtyards, then vanish into narrow passageways. It's easy to lose your sense of direction even today. And that confusion may be exactly what inspired one of the most famous myths in human history, the legend of the labyrinth. In Greek mythology, a monstrous creature lived beneath the palace of King Minos, the Minotaur, half man, half bull. It was imprisoned inside an endless maze so complex that anyone who entered would never escape. Only the hero Theseus survived the labyrinth, guided by a simple thread given to him by the Princess Ariadne. But myths rarely appear from nothing. They grow from memory. And when archaeologists began exploring the ruins of Knossos in the early 20th century, they discovered something remarkable. The man responsible was the British archaeologist Arthur Evans. What he uncovered looked uncannily like the legendary maze. Knossos was not a simple palace. It was practically a city, covering nearly 150,000 square feet and containing more than 1,000 rooms. The complex stretched across multiple levels, connected by corridors, staircases, and courtyards. Nothing was arranged in straight lines. Rooms branch unexpectedly. Hallways split and reconnect. Light wells cut through the structure, flooding lower floors with sunlight. To someone entering the palace for the first time, it must have felt like wandering inside a living labyrinth. And yet beneath this apparent chaos lay extraordinary engineering. The Minoans built multi-story buildings supported by wooden columns and stone foundations. They designed ventilation shafts that cooled the interior naturally. Clay pipes carried rainwater away from the palace, and some rooms even had flushing toilets centuries before similar systems appeared in Rome. This was not a primitive society. It was one of the most advanced cultures of the ancient Mediterranean. Throughout the palace, one symbol appears again and again: the bull. Frescoes show young men and women performing a breathtaking ritual known today as bull leaping. In these images, athletes grasp the horns of a charging bull, flip over its back, and land gracefully behind it. The scenes feel almost surreal. They are not depictions of hunting or sacrifice. They are performances, dangerous, graceful, almost ceremonial. Even the architecture reflects this reverence. Across rooftops and altars appear enormous stone shapes known as horns of consecration, stylized representations of bull horns. To the Minoans, the bull was sacred, a symbol of strength, fertility, and divine power. When later Greeks encountered these traditions, it is easy to imagine how their stories evolved. A sacred bull becomes a monstrous one, a complex palace becomes a labyrinth, and ritual performances transform into tales of sacrifice. The Minoan civilization flourished from roughly 2600 to 1400 BCE. Unlike many ancient powers, they did not dominate through massive armies or brutal conquest. Instead, they mastered the sea. Their ships traveled across the Mediterranean, connecting Crete with Egypt, Mesopotamia, the love and distant western lands. They traded pottery, saffron, olive oil, bronze, and luxury goods. This network made them extraordinarily wealthy, and their art reflects a society very different from later Greek cultures. Minoan frescoes celebrate nature. Dolphins swim across walls, flowers bloom in painted landscapes, human figures dance, leap, and move with fluid energy. War scenes are rare. Instead of glorifying conquest, the Minoans celebrated life. Their religion was equally mysterious. Unlike later Greek temples dedicated to powerful male gods, Minoan imagery often centers on female figures. These goddesses appear bare-breasted, holding snakes or standing among animals. They seem to embody fertility, protection, and transformation. Shrines are hidden throughout the palace. Small sacred chambers appear in unexpected corners. Stone pillars rise like silent guardians. Religion here was not confined to temples. It was woven directly into the architecture of everyday life. Despite their sophistication, the Minoans left behind one frustrating mystery: their writing system. Scholars call it linear linguistic. Thousands of tablets have been discovered, but no one has ever successfully deciphered them. Because of this, we don't know what the Minoans called themselves. We don't know their myths, their prayers, or their kings. Their voices remain silent. All we have are ruins, art, and echoes. This silence may be why the myths grew so powerful. To the later Greeks, Crete was an ancient, mysterious land, a place of strange rituals, sacred bulls, and magnificent palaces, a civilization both admired and feared. Some historians believe the myth of the labyrinth reflects a memory of Minoan dominance over the Aegean. At one time, Athens and other Greek cities may have paid tribute to Crete. The legend of sending youths to be devoured by the Minotaur could symbolize political submission to a powerful island empire. Others see the story in more symbolic terms. The labyrinth as the human mind, the Minotaur as the darker instincts hidden within it, and the hero Theseus as the courage required to confront those inner shadows. Walking through Knossos today still carries a strange feeling. Rooms twist and turn. Sunlight spills through open courtyards. Walls glow with painted dolphins and athletes frozen mid-leap. You can imagine priests chanting, crowds gathering in the central courtyard, the thunder of hooves as a bull charges forward in ritual display. There may never have been a literal labyrinth. There may never have been a Minotaur. But the palace itself almost feels alive, and sometimes that's all a legend needs. A place strange enough, a civilization mysterious enough, and a story waiting to be born. It may not have been sport. It may have been something far more sacred. Across the walls of Knossos, frescoes show young men and women vaulting over charging bulls, bodies suspended midair in a dangerous, graceful dance. This was not entertainment. It was ritual, a performance balance between life and death, a kind of sacred theater, perhaps an offering to the gods, or a symbolic triumph over chaos itself. Deeper within the palace, hidden in storerooms and quiet chambers, archaeologists uncovered another mystery. The snake goddesses, These small figurines, bare-breasted, arms raised, serpents coiled around their bodies, are among the most iconic artifacts of the Minoan civilization. They do not appear passive. They radiate authority. These were not idols meant to be worshipped from afar. They feel like guardians, symbols of fertility, protection, and life itself. To the Minoans, the snake was not something to fear. It represented renewal, rebirth, a creature that moved between worlds, earth and underworld, life and death. The rooms where these figures were found suggest something intimate, household shrines, sacred corners hidden within the living spaces of the palace. Religion here was not distant. It was woven into daily life. At Knossos, there is no towering central temple, because the palace itself was the temple. Every corridor, every chamber, every courtyard, the frescoes, the horns of consecration, the altars, the winding architecture, all of it formed a single, unified spiritual environment. This was not a place where people visited the sacred. It was a place where they lived inside it. A corridor could become a ritual path. A chamber could become a sanctuary. Even echoes of footsteps through stone halls may once have carried the weight of prayer. Knossos did not just house people. It housed belief. For centuries, the Minoan civilization flourished. It was a world of trade, art, and innovation, a maritime power that connected distant lands across the Mediterranean. And then suddenly, it faded. By around 1400 BCE, the palace was abandoned. The frescoes began to decay. The civilization that once ruled the seas vanished like mist over the Aegean. So what happened? No one knows for certain. One theory points to nature. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Santorini, ancient Thera, erupted in one of the most powerful explosions in human history. The blast may have triggered massive tsunamis that struck the northern coast of Crete. Ash clouds could have darkened the skies, disrupting agriculture and trade. Even if Knossos survived the initial disaster, the aftermath may have destabilized the entire civilization. Another theory points to invasion. By around 1450 BCE, mainland Greeks, known as the Mycenaeans, began to dominate the region. Archaeological evidence suggests Knossos was briefly reoccupied. But something had changed. The art became more rigid, more warlike. The undeciphered script known as Linear A was replaced by Linear B, a writing system used by the Mycenaeans. The culture that once celebrated fluid motion and nature began to speak in a different voice. And then there is a quieter possibility: internal collapse. Political instability, economic strain, a system that simply failed from within. What's striking is the lack of clear destruction. No mass graves, no widespread signs of violent catastrophe. Knossos did not fall with fire and screams. It fell with silence. The rituals stopped, the halls emptied, and time moved in. For thousands of years, Knossos lay buried beneath the soil of Crete, its name forgotten, its stories distorted into myth, until one man decided to follow the legend. His name was Arthur Evans. In 1900, Evans began excavating the site after local farmers uncovered strange artifacts beneath their land. What he found stunned the world: a palace unlike anything in ancient Greece. Vast, complex, and eerily reminiscent of the mythical labyrinth. Evans became convinced he had discovered the palace of King Minos. He named the civilization Minoan. He reconstructed frescoes, restored structures, and brought the site back to life, sometimes controversially, using modern materials. What stands today is part ancient ruin, part modern interpretation. But without Evans, Knossos might still lie hidden beneath the earth. Despite everything uncovered, one mystery remains: The Minoans left no readable voice behind. Their script, Linear A, has never been deciphered. We do not know their names for their gods. We do not know their stories. We do not know how they understood their own world. Instead, they speak through images, through symbols, through art. The walls of Knossos are alive with meaning. Dolphins glide across ceilings, flowers bloom in painted landscapes, figures dance, leap, and move with unnatural grace. There are no great war scenes, no glorified battles. This was not a culture obsessed with conquest. It was a culture that celebrated rhythm, nature, and balance. One symbol appears again and again, the double axe, known as the labrys, carved into stone, painted in shrines, repeated across the palace. Some scholars believe the word labyrinth itself may come from labrys, meaning not a maze, but the house of the double axe. If true, the labyrinth was never a prison, it was a sacred place. Then there are the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns placed atop walls and altars, markers of sacred space, boundaries between the ordinary and the divine. Even the structure of Knossos may hold symbolic meaning. Its winding corridors and layered rooms may represent more than architecture. They may represent a journey through life, through death, through the unknown, not a trap, but a path, a spiritual maze. But without a deciphered language, certainty remains just out of reach. Every interpretation stands on the edge between insight and imagination. The Minoans did not leave us clear stories. They left us fragments, symbols, echoes, and a palace that still feels alive. Because in the end, Knossos is not just a ruin, it is a question, one that has been waiting thousands of years to be answered, and perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. What is Knossos trying to say? We hear its rhythms, we see its images, but its meaning always stays just beyond reach, like a thread unraveling into myth. It is a ruin, yes, but it does not feel dead. Walk its corridors today and something lingers beneath the surface. Not ghosts, not gods, something quieter. Echoes. Echoes of lives once lived, of rituals once performed, of questions that refuse to disappear. Thousands of years after its fall, Knossos still holds us inside its maze. Tourists wander its halls, archaeologists dig for answers, writers reshape its shadows into stories. The Minotaur may be myth, but the feeling of the labyrinth is real. We do not know who ruled Knossos. We do not know the names of its kings, queens, or priests. We do not know the words of their prayers or the laws that govern their lives. But we know something else. We know they loved beauty. We know they revered nature. We know they understood balance between architecture and art, between ritual and reality. And we know one more thing. They came before the Parthenon, before Rome, before the great temples of other civilizations. There was Knossos, a palace that was also a city that was also a temple that may have also been a story. Perhaps the labyrinth was never a prison. Perhaps it was never a puzzle. Perhaps it was a narrative carved in stone, a myth shaped into architecture. The legend of the Minotaur did not emerge from nothing. It rose from this place, from its winding corridors, from its sacred connection to bulls, from the awe it inspired in those who tried to understand it. The ancient Greeks turned it into story. We turned it into archaeology. But at its core, it has always been both. Today we walk through Knossos in broad daylight. We take photographs. We map its layout. We reconstruct its frescoes. And yet the mystery remains. The line between fact and legend still shimmers, like heat rising from sunlit stone. Maybe that is why Knossos endures, because it does not give us all the answers. It reminds us that history is not always meant to be solved. Sometimes it is meant to be felt. Knossos is not just a place on a map. It is a question, one that draws us deeper with every step. And like Theseus, we are still following the thread. Long before gunpowder, before cannons shook the earth, ancient engineers were already mastering destruction. They understood something fundamental. Walls can fall. You just have to know how to make them. At first, it was simple. A tree trunk, lifted by soldiers, smashed again and again against a gate. Crude, exhausting, effective. But over time, it evolved. The battering ram became something more, mounted on wheels, suspended in frames, covered with protective roofs to shield its crew from arrows, stones, and burning oil. The Assyrians turned it into a weapon of terror. Their siege engines advanced slowly toward city gates, iron-tipped, unstoppable, accompanied by archers who rained death from above. Reliefs from Nineveh show them clearly, massive rams rolling forward like deliberate gods of destruction. They didn't just break doors, they broke morale. Because when a ram arrived, it meant one thing: surrender, or watch your walls collapse. If the ram was brute force, the catapult was intelligence. It didn't just destroy walls, it attacked the mind. Emerging in the Greek world around the 4th century BCE, these machines harnessed twisted sinew and rope to store immense energy. When released, that energy became devastation. Stones flew through the air, bolts pierced armor, fire rained down from a distance. Two primary forms dominated: the ballista, like a giant crossbow, and the stone thrower, hurling massive projectiles over walls. The Romans refined them further. Portable, efficient, deadly. They could dismantle and reassemble these weapons wherever needed, turning siege warfare into a science. But catapults did more than destroy. They sent messages. Corpses were flung over walls. Disease spread. Fear took root. For the first time, cities realized something terrifying. Their walls didn't just need to withstand impact. They had to survive the sky. If the catapult was clever, the trebuchet was magnificent. Towering, creaking, inevitable. It did not rely on tension. It relied on gravity. A massive counterweight dropped, a long arm swung, and destruction arced across the sky with astonishing precision. These machines could hurl enormous stones over great distances, smashing not just walls, but everything behind them: barracks, courtyards, supply stores. Nothing was safe, not even inside the city. And they didn't just launch stone, they launched fire, disease, messages, mockery. One legendary example, the Werewolf of Scotland, was so massive that its mere presence forced surrender. Yet even then, it was fired, because power like that demands to be seen. While other weapons broke defenses, siege towers bypassed them. These were moving fortresses, wooden giants on wheels, covered in wet hides to resist fire, filled with soldiers, archers, and anticipation. They didn't destroy walls, they climbed them. When a siege tower reached the battlements, it turned defense into chaos. Enemy soldiers poured directly onto the walls. The advantage vanished instantly. Some towers were monstrous in scale. During the siege of Rhodes, the massive Heliopolis Tower stood over 100 feet tall, an engineering marvel, armed and armored. But like all such creations, it came with risks. They were slow, heavy, vulnerable to terrain and fire. Defenders fought back with everything they had: ditches, flames, collapsing ground. Still, when a siege tower reached its target, the battle changed in an instant. From Knossos to catapults, from myth to machinery, one truth remains: human beings have always built, and they have always found ways to break what others build. Civilizations rise, they create beauty, meaning, stories, and then they fall. But something always survives: a ruin, a weapon, a myth, a question. And like the winding paths of Knossos, we keep moving forward, trying to understand it all. What is Knossos trying to say? We hear its rhythms, we see its images, but its meaning always stays just beyond reach, like a thread unraveling into myth. It is a ruin, yes, but it does not feel dead. Walk its corridors today and something lingers beneath the surface. Not ghosts, not gods, something quieter. Echoes. Echoes of lives once lived, of rituals once performed, of questions that refuse to disappear. Thousands of years after its fall, Knossos still holds us inside its maze. Tourists wander its halls, archaeologists dig for answers, writers reshape its shadows into stories. The Minotaur may be myth, but the feeling of the labyrinth is real. We do not know who ruled Knossos. We do not know the names of its kings, queens, or priests. We do not know the words of their prayers or the laws that govern their lives. But we know something else. We know they loved beauty. We know they revered nature. We know they understood balance between architecture and art, between ritual and reality. And we know one more thing. They came before the Parthenon, before Rome, before the great temples of other civilizations. There was Knossos, a palace that was also a city that was also a temple that may have also been a story. Perhaps the labyrinth was never a prison. Perhaps it was never a puzzle. Perhaps it was a narrative carved in stone, a myth shaped into architecture. The legend of the Minotaur did not emerge from nothing. It rose from this place, from its winding corridors, from its sacred connection to bulls, from the awe it inspired in those who tried to understand it. The ancient Greeks turned it into story. We turned it into archaeology. But at its core, it has always been both. Today we walk through Knossos in broad daylight. We take photographs. We map its layout. We reconstruct its frescoes. And yet the mystery remains. The line between fact and legend still shimmers, like heat rising from sunlit stone. Maybe that is why Knossos endures, because it does not give us all the answers. It reminds us that history is not always meant to be solved. Sometimes it is meant to be felt. Knossos is not just a place on a map. It is a question, one that draws us deeper with every step. And like Theseus, we are still following the thread. Long before gunpowder, before cannons shook the earth, ancient engineers were already mastering destruction. They understood something fundamental. Walls can fall. You just have to know how to make them. At first, it was simple. A tree trunk, lifted by soldiers, smashed again and again against a gate. Crude, exhausting, effective. But over time, it evolved. The battering ram became something more, mounted on wheels, suspended in frames, covered with protective roofs to shield its crew from arrows, stones, and burning oil. The Assyrians turned it into a weapon of terror. Their siege engines advanced slowly toward city gates, iron-tipped, unstoppable, accompanied by archers who rained death from above. Reliefs from Nineveh show them clearly, massive rams rolling forward like deliberate gods of destruction. They didn't just break doors, they broke morale. Because when a ram arrived, it meant one thing: surrender, or watch your walls collapse. If the ram was brute force, the catapult was intelligence. It didn't just destroy walls, it attacked the mind. Emerging in the Greek world around the 4th century BCE, these machines harnessed twisted sinew and rope to store immense energy. When released, that energy became devastation. Stones flew through the air, bolts pierced armor, fire rained down from a distance. Two primary forms dominated: the ballista, like a giant crossbow, and the stone thrower, hurling massive projectiles over walls. The Romans refined them further. Portable, efficient, deadly. They could dismantle and reassemble these weapons wherever needed, turning siege warfare into a science. But catapults did more than destroy. They sent messages. Corpses were flung over walls. Disease spread. Fear took root. For the first time, cities realized something terrifying. Their walls didn't just need to withstand impact. They had to survive the sky. If the catapult was clever, the trebuchet was magnificent. Towering, creaking, inevitable. It did not rely on tension. It relied on gravity. A massive counterweight dropped, a long arm swung, and destruction arced across the sky with astonishing precision. These machines could hurl enormous stones over great distances, smashing not just walls, but everything behind them: barracks, courtyards, supply stores. Nothing was safe, not even inside the city. And they didn't just launch stone, they launched fire, disease, messages, mockery. One legendary example, the Werewolf of Scotland, was so massive that its mere presence forced surrender. Yet even then, it was fired, because power like that demands to be seen. While other weapons broke defenses, siege towers bypassed them. These were moving fortresses, wooden giants on wheels, covered in wet hides to resist fire, filled with soldiers, archers, and anticipation. They didn't destroy walls, they climbed them. When a siege tower reached the battlements, it turned defense into chaos. Enemy soldiers poured directly onto the walls. The advantage vanished instantly. Some towers were monstrous in scale. During the siege of Rhodes, the massive Heliopolis Tower stood over 100 feet tall, an engineering marvel, armed and armored. But like all such creations, it came with risks. They were slow, heavy, vulnerable to terrain and fire. Defenders fought back with everything they had: ditches, flames, collapsing ground. Still, when a siege tower reached its target, the battle changed in an instant. From Knossos to catapults, from myth to machinery, one truth remains: human beings have always built, and they have always found ways to break what others build. Civilizations rise, they create beauty, meaning, stories, and then they fall. But something always survives: a ruin, a weapon, a myth, a question. And like the winding paths of Knossos, we keep moving forward, trying to understand it all.